Sounds like a BMW with nicer wheels and a strange badge, right? That is the easy explanation. It is also wrong. Alpina is older than BMW M, spent decades with its own factory, carried its own vehicle identification numbers, and in the eyes of the German government was not legally a BMW at all. It began with a young man hiding in an outbuilding behind a typewriter factory, became a championship-winning racing operation, turned into one of Germany's smallest recognized automobile manufacturers, and somehow built a side business selling more than 1 million bottles of wine. Then, after nearly 60 years of stubborn independence, the family behind it finally sold the name to BMW itself. That sounds like a tuner becoming part of the company it tuned. But Alpina was never just a tuner, and the reason Germany treated it differently explains almost everything about why these cars feel so unusual. To understand that, you have to go back to Bavaria in the early 1960s, when Burkard Bovenseepen was expected to inherit a very different kind of precision business. His father made typewriters, reliable, carefully engineered office machines. It was the sort of family company where the obvious future involved keys, ribbons, paper, and a lifetime spent making sure accountants could type faster. Burkard was interested in machinery, just not that machinery. He bought a new BMW 1500, one of the cars that helped drag BMW back from serious financial trouble, and immediately found something he wanted to fix. The chassis was excellent, the engine was not. The 1500 made about 80 horsepower through a single Solex carburetor, and Burkard believed the car could breathe a lot better, so he moved into an outbuilding on the family property and started experimenting. He replaced the stock setup with twin Weber carburetors, similar to the sort of hardware used by sporty Italian cars at the time. Power climbed by roughly 15%, acceleration improved by several seconds. For a home-built conversion created beside a typewriter business, it was a very convincing result, and Burkard immediately saw the bigger opportunity. If his BMW felt transformed, other BMW owners might pay for the same transformation. In 1963, he went to the Frankfurt Motor Show with a carburetor kit to sell, except there was one small problem. He could not afford an exhibition stand. So his first major marketing campaign consisted of walking through the parking area, finding BMW 1500s, and sliding brochures beneath their windshield wipers. That was the entire strategy. No glamorous launch, no racing team, no giant sign. Just a young engineer, a stack of paper, and a parking lot full of potential customers. It worked. He sold roughly 100 kits, but the more important customer was not a customer at all. Paul Hunneman, BMW's sales chief, learned about the conversion, tested it, and liked it enough to give the little operation an extraordinary form of approval. BMW owners could install the Alpina kit without losing their factory warranty. Think about how unusual that is. BMW was effectively telling customers that modifications designed by an outside engineer in a shed were good enough to trust with its own name and warranty obligations. That endorsement gave Burkard credibility no advertisement could buy. In 1965, he formally created the company and used the Alpina name from his father's business, a reference to the nearby Alps, and, conveniently, a name already printed on family stationery. It was sentimental and practical at exactly the same time, which is a surprisingly accurate preview of the company he was about to build. For the next several years, Alpina was not manufacturing entire automobiles. It developed performance hardware. Carburetor systems came first, followed by crankshafts, ignition equipment, and increasingly complete engine and chassis packages that BMW dealers could fit to customer cars. If you wanted more performance from a BMW without turning your expensive new sedan into a warranty argument, Alpina offered something almost nobody else could. Then racing turned that credibility into reputation. Beginning in 1968, Alpina prepared BMWs entered serious competition, and by 1970, the small Bavarian outfit was winning on an absurd scale. That year, Alpina machinery captured the European Touring Car Championship, the German Hill Climb Championship, and the Spa 24 Hours. The company also attracted drivers whose names would become permanent fixtures in motorsport history, including Niki Lauda, James Hunt, Jackie Ickx, and Derek Bell. Formula One winners, world champions, and Le Mans legends were driving BMWs prepared by the same firm that had recently been advertising with paper under windshield wipers. The racing mattered for trophies, but its real value was engineering. Every failure exposed a weakness. Every long-distance event tested cooling, fuel delivery, brakes, engines, and reliability at a level no road test could reproduce. Alpina was building a technical identity in public, one race weekend at a time. By the late 1970s, it was ready to move beyond the idea of a dealer-installed performance package. In 1978 came the B6 2.8, based on the contemporary BMW 3 Series. This was not simply a stock BMW with a few catalog parts attached. Alpina defined the engine specification, chassis behavior, appearance, and overall character as one finished vehicle. It looked like the next logical step, but legally it was a huge one. In 1983, the German Federal Ministry of Transport officially recognized Alpina as an automobile manufacturer. Not a parts supplier, not an aftermarket modifier, a manufacturer. And that is the answer hiding inside the title of this story. From that point, an Alpina carried its own manufacturer identity and its own identification number. It could begin with a BMW shell, BMW engineering, and a BMW engine family, and it could be developed with BMW's direct cooperation, yet the finished car was legally registered as an Alpina. Germany was not pretending the BMW connection did not exist. It was recognizing that Alpina's involvement began deeply enough, early enough, and comprehensively enough that the final product qualified as a different automobile. That distinction separates Alpina from the normal image of a tuning company. A conventional tuner buys or receives a completed production car, changes parts afterward, and sells the modified result. Alpina worked with BMW before the finished vehicle reached the customer. Its engineering decisions were planned into the car. Its production was integrated into the process. Its finished vehicles were approved under Alpina's own manufacturer status. The BMW was the foundation, not the final identity. There was also a manufacturing detail that made the relationship unusually intimate. Alpina did not simply wait for complete BMWs to arrive in Buchloe and then tear them apart. Depending on the model and era, BMW assembly plants could build vehicles with Alpina-specific components and preparations already accounted for, while specialized powertrain and finishing work remained tied to Alpina. That meant the transformation was planned before the car was complete, not improvised afterward. It is a subtle distinction, but it explains why the German government treated Alpina differently from a shop that modifies a registered production car. The car existed as an Alpina through the production process itself, and that philosophy extended to speed. Alpina models were often geared and calibrated for sustained high-speed travel rather than just dramatic acceleration numbers. Some could run at speeds beyond the electronically limited figures associated with comparable BMW performance models, which made perfect sense for the Autobahn environment they were designed around. The point was never simply to win a 0 to 60 argument. It was to make 120, 140, or 150 miles an hour feel eerily normal. That is also why the visual restraint mattered. An Alpina could sit in traffic looking like a particularly tasteful BMW, then cover ground at a pace that belonged in a much louder super sedan. The secrecy was part of the charm. Enthusiasts noticed the wheels, the stripes, the paint, and the tiny badges. Everyone else mostly saw another executive sedan. Alpina customers often preferred it that way. They were not buying the car to explain it at every fuel stop. They were buying engineering that revealed itself when the road opened up. That combination of anonymity, legality, and engineering depth is why the badge carried a kind of credibility no ordinary cosmetic package could imitate at all. And the timing makes the story even stranger, because Alpina was doing this before BMW had an M division. Alpina formally existed from 1965. BMW Motorsport, the organization that evolved into the modern M brand, arrived in 1972. 7 years separated them. For a period, BMW had one internal performance organization growing out of motorsport and one independent partner already building faster road cars from BMW hardware. They shared a starting point, but over time they developed almost opposite ideas about what performance should feel like. BMW M became the extrovert. Alpina became the quiet one. M chased the sensation of competition, response, revs, steering precision, harder suspension, engines that rewarded being worked aggressively. The philosophy was simple. Bring as much race car intensity as possible onto public roads without making the car unusable. Alpina looked at the same roads and asked a different question. What if enormous speed did not need to feel like effort? Andreas Bovenseepen, Burkard's son and later company leader, has explained that early Alpina engineers needed big performance at a time when BMW did not yet offer the huge V8 and V12 engines that later luxury cars could rely on. Turbocharging became one of their answers. More importantly, Alpina tuned those turbocharged engines for a thick wave of torque low and through the middle of the rev range. The driver did not need to chase redline constantly. Press the accelerator and the car simply surged forward. Andreas compared that sort of delivery to the effortless character of a Bentley. BMW M, especially in its classic naturally aspirated eras, went the other direction with multi-valve engines that loved high engine speeds and gave their best when the driver chased the top of the tachometer. One philosophy asks you to participate in the performance. The other tries to make outrageous performance feel almost casual. If an M car is a double espresso before a track session, an Alpina is a very expensive glass of whiskey in a fast-moving first-class lounge. Both can wake you up. Only one is trying to relax you at the same time. That difference explains why Alpina could remain tiny while building an unusually loyal customer base. The company left professional racing in 1988, partly because changing engine regulations made competition less attractive, but it no longer needed racing to prove itself. Its production cars carried the lessons forward. At peak output, Alpina built only around 1,700 to 2,000 vehicles per year. BMW produces more than 2 million. In pure volume, Alpina was almost invisible inside the automotive industry, and that scarcity made the cars rarer on the road than products from much louder luxury brands. The company also remained family-controlled for most of its independent life, eventually passing leadership from Burkard to Andreas. And then there is the detail that makes Alpina sound like somebody accidentally combined two unrelated companies. Wine. Burkard developed a serious interest in fine wine, and the company built a wine distribution operation alongside the automotive business. Over time, it became one of Germany's respected wine sellers, with stocks running beyond 1 million bottles. A company famous for turbocharged luxury sedans was also moving enormous quantities of Bordeaux. Odd as that sounds, the connection actually makes sense. Alpina's entire identity was built around refinement rather than spectacle. It cared about small differences, patient selection, exact conditions, and making something already good feel noticeably more special. Apparently that applied equally well to engines and cellars. But this raises the practical question most people eventually ask. If the cars still use BMW platforms, BMW body structures, BMW engines, and BMW dealerships, what exactly did Alpina change to justify becoming its own manufacturer? Start with the engine. Alpina used BMW power plants as the base, then specified its own turbocharging, cooling, software calibration, exhaust characteristics, and supporting hardware depending on the model. A lot of the specialized engine work was completed at Alpina's facility in Buchloe, Bavaria. The target was rarely a dramatic dyno number for the sake of the brochure. The target was usable force. Look at an Alpina B5 and the contemporary BMW M5. Both relied on versions of BMW's 4.4-liter twin-turbo V8, and both lived around the 600 horsepower level. But the Alpina produced roughly 590 pound-feet of torque versus about 553 in the M5 comparison cited at the time. The M5 could launch harder and reach 60 sooner, exactly as you would expect from the more aggressive car. The B5 delivered a broader, smoother shove that suited high-speed road travel. Similar patterns appeared across the range: B7 versus M760i, B8 versus M8. Alpina was not afraid of horsepower, but it cared deeply about how easily that horsepower arrived. The chassis followed the same thinking. Alpina suspension tuning generally softened the sharp edges without making the car lazy. Spring rates, dampers, bushings, alignment, steering behavior, wheel and tire choices were calibrated around stability and comfort at very high road speeds. Some models also used rear-wheel steering, where comparable M variants did not. The objective was not to set the fastest possible lap with your teeth clenched. The objective was to cruise at autobahn speeds that would make most drivers uncomfortable, while the cabin remained composed enough that your passenger could still hold a coffee. That sounds like a joke until you realize it is basically the engineering brief. Then there is the design language. Alpina's 20-spoke wheels became its visual signature, delicate looking at first glance, but instantly recognizable once you know them. Alpina Blue Metallic and Alpina Green Metallic gave enthusiasts two exclusive colors that could identify the car before you ever saw the badge. The thin decorative stripes running along the body connected modern models to the company's older racing liveries. Front spoilers, discreet lettering, unique trim, and model-specific details added presence without turning the cars into rolling billboards. Inside, Alpina pushed further into bespoke luxury with special leather, unique stitching, hand-finished wood, distinct instrument graphics, steering wheel details, and badges that could not simply be selected from a normal BMW configurator. That is why calling one a luxurious BMW only gets you halfway there. The donor car supplied the architecture. Alpina changed the experience. It took the basic BMW vocabulary and spoke it with a different accent. The central contrast is easiest to understand in one sentence. BMW M tries to build the best track-influenced car that still works on the street. Alpina tries to build the best road car that can happen to travel extremely, almost irresponsibly, fast. Neither formula is automatically superior. If you want steering that talks constantly, a chassis that feels tightly wound, and an engine that rewards aggression, M makes perfect sense. If you want to cross a country at enormous speed with less noise, less effort, and more leather, Alpina makes just as much sense. The interesting part is that BMW allowed both philosophies to coexist for decades, even when Alpina was technically a separate manufacturer, using BMW products as raw material. That relationship lasted because both sides benefited. BMW gained an elite halo brand without having to duplicate Alpina's exact niche internally. Alpina gained access to engineering resources, platforms, engines, dealers, and supply chains that a company producing fewer than 2,000 cars per year could never have created alone. For almost 60 years, independence and dependence existed at the same time. Alpina needed BMW, but it was not BMW. Then modern automobile manufacturing made that balancing act increasingly difficult. In 2022, BMW announced that it would acquire the Alpina brand. The important detail is what did not happen. There was no spectacular bankruptcy, no scandal that destroyed the company, no sudden collapse in customer demand. The pressure came from the boring things that can kill small manufacturers quietly. Emissions rules, safety requirements, software integration, certification costs, development complexity, and the enormous expense of electrification. A low-volume company can spread engineering costs across 2,000 cars. BMW can spread them across millions. As vehicles became more digital and more regulated, every Alpina generation required deeper access to BMW systems and more money simply to remain legally sellable. Independence had become part of the brand's romance, but increasingly, it was an expensive romance. The Bovenseepen family faced an uncomfortable choice: protect independence until the business became unsustainable, or give up independence so the name could survive. They chose survival. BMW's acquisition brought the brand it had partnered with for 6 decades directly under its control, with production and operations moving toward deeper integration. The company name transitioned toward BMW Alpina, while Andreas Bovenseepen remained involved around vehicle development, service, parts, and accessories rather than continuing the old model of a fully independent automobile manufacturer. For longtime fans, that is where the story becomes bittersweet. Alpina spent decades proving that an outsider could work beside one of the world's biggest manufacturers without being absorbed by it. It earned official manufacturer recognition in 1983. It developed its own identification numbers. It raced, engineered, sold, and evolved under family ownership. Then the very complexity of modern cars made the original arrangement harder to defend. But there is another way to look at the acquisition. BMW ownership gives Alpina access to the scale required to keep building cars as safety systems, software, electrification, and global regulation become more expensive. It could improve consistency. It could increase production. Most importantly, it gives the Alpina name a realistic path to remain attached to new cars rather than becoming a beautiful historical footnote. The risk, of course, is philosophical. Scarcity was part of Alpina. Family control was part of Alpina. The knowledge that this small company in Buchloe could take BMW's latest machinery, calmly disagree with Munich about what performance should mean, and sell its own answer under a separate manufacturer identity was part of the appeal. Under full BMW ownership, survival is easier. Remaining unmistakably Alpina may be the harder challenge, and that brings us back to the strange legal fact that started this story. For decades, Germany did not treat an Alpina as simply a modified BMW because Alpina had crossed the line from modifying finished cars to engineering and producing distinct automobiles. It had its own status, its own identification, its own technical decisions, and a philosophy that could be felt from the first press of the throttle. The company started with an 80-horsepower BMW 1500 and a young man who thought one carburetor was not enough. It found customers by putting brochures under windshield wipers. BMW trusted the work before most people knew the name. Racing turned that trust into credibility. Niki Lauda, James Hunt, Jackie Ickx, and Derek Bell helped prove the engineering in competition. The B6 helped transform a tuning specialist into a carmaker. Government recognition made that transformation official. Then Alpina spent decades proving that performance did not need to shout. More torque instead of more drama. More comfort instead of more punishment. Enormous speed delivered with less effort. Even the million-bottle wine business somehow fits the pattern. This was a company obsessed with the difference between good and exquisitely sorted. So when somebody calls an Alpina a BMW with a nicer interior and funny wheels, the badge is not the important correction. The history is. For most of its independent existence, Alpina was a separate manufacturer that chose BMW as its foundation, not a BMW trim level pretending to be exotic. Now that distinction is changing because the brand has finally moved inside BMW itself. It is a quiet ending to one of the stranger stories in modern performance cars. No flames, no corporate war. Just a family deciding that the best way to preserve what it built was to surrender the independence that made it special. And maybe that is the real Alpina contradiction. It became famous by taking BMWs and refusing to think like BMW. It survived for decades because BMW trusted it enough to stay outside, and its future now depends on BMW owning it from the inside. If you had to choose, would you take the sharper, louder, more aggressive M philosophy or the Alpina idea of effortless speed, huge torque, and long-distance comfort? Tell me which side you are on, and if stories hidden behind familiar badges are your thing, subscribe, because there are plenty more manufacturers that are not quite what they appear to be.